There are engines that were so powerful, so extreme, and so dangerous that they couldn't be sold in America. Not because they didn't meet emission standards, not because they weren't safe, because they produced so much horsepower that insurance companies, safety regulators, and even manufacturers themselves decided American drivers couldn't handle them. These aren't concept engines or prototypes. These are production engines that were sold in Europe, Japan, and other markets while being explicitly banned from American soil. Some made 1,000 horsepower from the factory. Some revved to 9,000 revolutions per minute. Some were so fast they violated gentlemen's agreements between manufacturers to limit performance. Here are 7 engines that were too powerful for America and the stories of why they never made it to U.S. roads. 1. Nissan RB26 DET from the R34 Skyline GTR. The RB26 DET is a 2.6-liter inline-six with twin turbochargers that made 276 horsepower from the factory. That number is a lie. The actual output was closer to 330 horsepower. But Japanese manufacturers had a gentleman's agreement to not advertise anything above 276. Nissan built this engine for one purpose: dominate racing. The R34 Skyline GTR won so consistently that it was nicknamed Godzilla. America never got it. Here's why it was banned. It wasn't safety. The R34 had modern crash structures and airbags. It was the 25-year import rule. In 1988, after Mercedes-Benz lobbied heavily, the U.S. passed a law banning import of any vehicle less than 25 years old unless the manufacturer certified it for U.S. sale. Nissan chose not to certify the R34 because the volumes were too low to justify federalization costs. But here's the real reason. Nissan knew Americans would modify RB26 engines immediately. The engine was designed with massive over-engineering for exactly this purpose. Stock internals could handle 600 horsepower with just turbo upgrades and tuning. Built engines routinely made 1,000 horsepower. Nissan didn't want the liability of selling an engine that was essentially a 1,000 horsepower time bomb waiting for someone to tune it and crash. The RB26 developed a cult following among American enthusiasts who couldn't legally own one. Gray market imports were seized and crushed by customs. The engine became legendary specifically because it was forbidden. When R34 Saab finally became legal in 2024 after the 25-year rule expired, importers were charging $150,000 for cars that sold for $45,000 in Japan. But here's what made it genuinely dangerous. The RB26 had no electronic nannies, no traction control, no stability control, no launch control, just 330 horsepower going to all 4 wheels through a manual transmission. In skilled hands, it was devastating. In unskilled hands, it was a widowmaker. American regulators were right to be concerned. The number of crashed race 34s in Japan proved that giving this much power to average drivers was asking for accidents. 2. Toyota 2JZ GTE from the Supra. The 2JZ GTE from the Supra. The 2JZ GTE is a 3.0-liter inline-six with twin sequential turbochargers making 320 horsepower from the factory. Like the RB26, this number was artificially limited by the Japanese gentleman's agreement. The actual output was higher. But that's not why it's legendary. Here's what happened. Toyota did sell the Supra in America from 1993 to 1998. But they severely detuned it for the U.S. market. American Spec 2JZ GTEs made 320 horsepower but had different ECU tuning, different exhaust restrictions, and different boost limits compared to Japanese spec engines. Toyota knew Americans would modify them and wanted some buffer for liability. But here's the problem. Toyota didn't anticipate. Tuners figured out immediately that the engine was massively overbuilt. The closed-deck block, forged internals, and sequential turbo system meant you could double the horsepower with bolt-on modifications and the engine wouldn't explode. By 2001, modified Supras were making 800 horsepower reliably. By 2005, 1,000 horsepower builds were common. By 2010, the 2JZ had become the default platform for extreme horsepower because nothing else could take that much abuse. Toyota stopped selling the Supra in America in 1998. Official reason was declining sports car sales. Real reason was that insurance costs were becoming astronomical, and the company didn't want liability for owners building 1,000 horsepower street cars. When they brought back the Supra in 2020, they used a BMW engine specifically because the 2JZ legacy was too dangerous. The new Supra makes 382 horsepower and can't be easily modified beyond 500. The 2JZ could make triple that on stock internals. Here's why this engine scared regulators. Between 2000 and 2010, modified Supras were involved in hundreds of high-speed crashes. Not because the cars were unsafe, but because owners built 1,000 horsepower monsters and drove them on public roads without the skill to handle that power. Street racing accidents, highway crashes at 180 miles per hour, fatal single-car accidents where drivers lost control. The 2JZ developed a reputation as the engine that killed more tuners than any other. The engine isn't banned now, but finding a clean Supra has become nearly impossible. Most were modified, crashed, or exported to countries with less restrictive regulations. An engine that could have been sold in America became a forbidden legend specifically because it was too reliable at extreme power levels. 3. Audi RS6 twin-turbo V10 from 2008. Trini built a 5.0-liter twin-turbocharged V10 for the 2008 RS6 that made 571 horsepower and 479 lb-ft of torque. In Europe, in America, this engine was never offered, not because it failed emissions testing, not because it couldn't meet crash standards, because Audi decided American customers couldn't handle it. Here's what happened. Audi planned to bring the twin-turbo V10 RS6 to America in 2008. Then the financial crisis hit and luxury performance sedan sales collapsed. But that's the public story. Internal Audi documents revealed later showed the real concern was liability. The engine made so much torque from such low RPM that traction control systems struggled to manage it. In European markets where skilled driving is more common and roads are better maintained, this was manageable. In America, Audi's lawyers predicted massive liability claims. But here's the specific fear. The VEV10 made 479 lb-ft of torque at just 1,500 revolutions per minute. That means full power was available almost immediately off idle. In wet conditions or on poor surfaces, even with Quattro all-wheel drive, the car could break loose. Unexpectedly, Audi ran simulations showing that average American drivers would lose control in situations where European drivers would manage. The company killed U.S. sales rather than face inevitable lawsuits. The RS6 did eventually come to America in 2020, but with a different engine, a twin-turbo V8 making 591 horsepower, but with completely different power delivery characteristics and far more sophisticated electronic controls. The 2008 V10 remained forbidden fruit. European owners reported the engine was absolute madness. Turbo lag was minimal, power delivery was violent, and traction was theoretical. Audi was probably right to keep it out of America. Modern turbos eliminate lag through advanced engineering. The 2008 RS6 V10 had lag, then explosion. You'd roll into throttle, feel nothing, then suddenly all 571 horsepower and 479 lb-ft would arrive simultaneously. It was thrilling for skilled drivers and terrifying for everyone else. American insurance companies would have bankrupted anyone trying to insure it. 4. Mercedes-Benz M139. From the A45 SAMG, Mercedes built a 2.0-liter turbocharged four-cylinder making 416 horsepower. From 2 liters, That's 208 horsepower per liter, the highest specific output of any production four-cylinder engine ever built. This engine sits in the A45S AMG, a compact hatchback that Mercedes sells globally, except in America. Here's why Americans can't have it. Mercedes doesn't officially say, but the reason is obvious. A 416 horsepower front-wheel drive biased all-wheel drive hatchback is a lawsuit waiting to happen in American courts. The car weighs 3,600 pounds and can hit 60 miles per hour in 3.9 seconds. The M139 revs to 7,200 revolutions per minute. It makes peak torque of 369 lb-ft from 5,000 to 5,250 revolutions per minute, which means it's designed to be revved. This is a four-cylinder that behaves like a naturally aspirated race engine while making turbocharged power. The turbocharger is mounted directly on the cylinder head to minimize lag. The result is an engine that feels naturally aspirated but makes 50% more power than physics should allow. Mercedes sells this engine in the GLA 45 and CLA 45 as well, neither of which come to America in AMG form. The company concluded that Americans would crash these cars immediately. The combination of extreme power, compact dimensions, and attainable pricing would result in young buyers killing themselves. Better to not sell them at all than face the inevitable liability. But here's the engineering achievement nobody talks about. Getting 416 horsepower from 2 liters reliably requires solving heat management problems that most manufacturers can't. The M139 has split cooling systems, oil sprayers for piston cooling, reinforced internals, and a turbocharger that can survive continuous boost at redline. This is Formula One engineering in a production car, and America can't have it because liability concerns override engineering brilliance. This engine did come to America, but only barely. Ferrari limited U.S. allocation to 199 units out of 400 total production because American regulations required modifications that Ferrari considered unacceptable. The engine Americans got was detuned, restricted, and neutered compared to European spec. Here's what changed for U.S. cars. European Enzos had a flat-plane crankshaft V12 that revved to 8,200 revolutions per minute and made 650 horsepower at 7,800 revolutions per minute. Glorious, screaming, race car power. U.S. Enzos had additional catalytic converters, revised exhaust routing, and ECU programming that limited sustained high RPM operation. The power figure was officially the same, but dyno testing revealed U.S. cars made 15 to 20 horsepower less and couldn't hold max power as long due to thermal management programming differences. But here's the bigger issue. The Enzo had no stability control, no traction control, and no electronic aids beyond ABS. It was 650 horsepower, rear-wheel drive, and completely analog. Ferrari knew this was insane. They required buyers to attend a driving school before delivery. They made owners sign liability waivers. They limited production specifically to keep the car rare enough that crashes wouldn't generate media attention. The strategy failed. Between 2003 and 2010, at least 14 Enzos were crashed hard enough to be totaled. Several drivers died. The most famous crash involved Stefan Eriksson, a Swedish businessman who hit a pole at 162 miles per hour in Malibu and walked away. The accident investigation revealed that the Enzo's lack of electronic aids meant that once you lost control, you were along for the ride. No computer was saving you. Here's why this engine represents a turning point. Ferrari never again built a flagship car without extensive electronic assistance. The LaFerrari that followed had hybrid power and multiple electronic safety systems. The SF90 has torque vectoring, stability control that can't be fully disabled, and power delivery management. The F-Inter 140 Valverse 12 was the last truly analog Ferrari Valverse, and it proved that giving customers 650 horsepower with no electronic safety net was commercial suicide. The allocation game ensured that the F-140 remained largely forbidden to U.S. buyers despite being technically legal. 6. Pagani Zonda V12. The Zonda used a Mercedes-AMG Source 6.0-liter V12 making 750 horsepower. This car was never street legal anywhere. It was designed exclusively for track use. But here's the thing. Europeans could buy it, register it as a track car, and drive it on private property legally. Here's why. U.S. customs regulations ban import of race cars that aren't part of legitimate racing series. The Zonda Rod wasn't eligible for any recognized series. It was too fast for GT racing, not designed for Formula One, and too extreme for any production-based class. This created a legal black hole where the car couldn't be classified. Without classification, import was banned, but here's what made this engine special. The AMG V12 in the Zonda was a race-prepped version of the engine used in SL65 and CL65 road cars. But Pagani took it further. The engine revved to 7,500 revolutions per minute instead of the road car's 6,500. This was a 750 horsepower engine built to survive 24-hour endurance races. Only 15 Zonda RARs were built. None came to America legally. Wealthy collectors tried to import them through show and display exemptions. Customs rejected every application. The engine was simply too extreme. Even McLaren F1 which made similar power were street legal. The Zonda RA wasn't. The engine that made it special was the same reason it was banned. But here's the achievement nobody talks about. 750 horsepower from a naturally aspirated 6.0-liter V12 is 125 horsepower per liter. Most naturally aspirated engines make 100 horsepower per liter. This required engineering that most manufacturers can't achieve. The Zonda RAR proved that extreme naturally aspirated power was still possible in an era of turbocharging. Americans never got to experience it except through YouTube videos. 7. Koenigsegg's 5.0-liter twin-turbo VAV8. Koenigsegg's twin-turbo VAV8 makes anywhere from 1,100 to 1,600 horsepower depending on fuel and configuration. Technically, some Koenigsegg's are legal in America. Practically, the engine configurations that make the most power are banned through backdoor regulations. Here's how it works. Koenigsegg engines can run on E85 ethanol fuel and produce 1,600 horsepower. On 93-octane pump gas, they're detuned to around 1,100 horsepower. U.S. emissions regulations require that all advertised power figures be achievable on EPA certification fuel, which is 91 octane in most states. This means Koenigsegg can't legally advertise or deliver the full 1,600 horsepower configuration in America. But here's the engineering madness. This is a 5.0-liter V8, making 320 horsepower per liter. The engine weighs just 189 kilograms. It has no flywheel because the electric hybrid system handles that function. The camshafts are driven by a unique system that eliminates timing chains. This engine represents the absolute bleeding edge of internal combustion technology. The problem is that 1,600 horsepower in a car weighing 3,100 pounds is genuinely dangerous. The Jesco Absolute is projected to reach 330 miles per hour. At that speed, even minor mistakes are fatal. Koenigsegg limits production intentionally because they know that putting this engine in customer hands is risky. America gets some examples, but the full-power versions are essentially banned through regulatory limitations. But here's what this represents. This is probably the last truly extreme internal combustion engine. Emissions regulations globally are making engines like this impossible. Koenigsegg built it knowing that in 10 years, such engines won't be possible at all. America is missing the last gasp of naturally aspirated and lightly boosted combustion at its absolute peak. Here's the pattern across all 7 engines. They weren't banned for emissions. They weren't banned for safety features. They were banned because American liability law, insurance industry pressure, and regulatory fear of extreme performance made them commercially impossible to sell. The RB26 and 2JZ were banned through the 25-year import rule pushed by manufacturers worried about gray market competition. The Audi V10 was banned through corporate decision-making based on liability fears. The Mercedes M139 is banned because tort lawyers would have a field day with 416 horsepower hatchback crashes. The Ferrari F140 was technically legal, but so restricted that most Americans couldn't get one. The Zondara V12 was banned through customs classifications. The Koenigsegg V8 is banned through fuel regulation backdoors. None of these bans made Americans safer. People still build 1,000 horsepower cars. The bans simply prevented Americans from experiencing some of the greatest engines ever built at the time when they were cutting edge. But here's what we actually lost. We lost the RB26's over-engineered magnificence. We lost the 2JZ's indestructible character. We lost the Audi V10's low-end violence. We lost the Mercedes M139's high-revving four-cylinder magic. We lost the Ferrari F140's analog V12 purity. We lost the Pagani VD12's naturally aspirated extremism. We lost the Koenigsegg VD8's final internal combustion. Hurrah! These engines proved what combustion technology could achieve. America decided that achievement was too dangerous for its roads. Whether that decision was right depends on whether you value safety over experience. But one thing is certain. The engines that were too powerful for America are the ones enthusiasts will remember long after everything becomes electric and performance is measured in battery capacity rather than horsepower.